I had long grown accustomed to the measured life in our small house by the coast. My days always began the same way: a light sea breeze, breakfast on the terrace, and my work at the school where I taught art. I spent my evenings at the easel, trying to bring the canvas to life with colors and memories. My marriage to David, a university professor, had become dull and predictable. Sometimes I felt like I was on autopilot. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, David shared news that immediately knocked me out of my usual routine. His nephew, Oliver, a young photographer from New York, was planning to spend several months in Europe and wanted to stay with us. David asked me to meet him from the train since he had lectures scheduled that day. On the way to the station, I wondered what this young man would be like. I had heard about him before: free-spirited, passionate, always in search of new experiences. But those were just words, empty descriptions. I didn't expect our meeting to make such an impression on me. When the train arrived, I immediately spotted him among the passengers. Tall, with a casual smile and bright eyes, he looked like the embodiment of energy and freedom, something that had been missing in my own life. From the very first glance, I felt a slight excitement. Oliver approached me with ease and greeted me with a friendly hug, as if we had known each other for a long time. He quickly began to share stories of his travels through South America, about sleeping under the stars in Patagonia and watching sunrises in the Andes. His stories were breathtaking. He was completely different, free and fearless, unlike anyone in my circle, unlike David. On the way home, I listened to his tales and felt something stirring inside me. His energy was contagious, and his passion for life was inspiring. When we arrived at the house, I realized that this young man might bring something new and long forgotten into my life. Oliver offered to show me his photographs, and I gladly agreed. His works were filled with life and movement, seemingly coming to life before my eyes, telling stories of distant lands and adventures. That evening, for the first time in a long while, I felt a thrill and anticipation of something unusual. I couldn't stop thinking that Oliver's mysterious visit might be the beginning of something new. The next day, Oliver invited me to go with him to an exhibition in an old building on the outskirts of the city. He mentioned that it would feature his works inspired by his travels in South America. I agreed, hesitantly. Such events hadn't interested me for a long time, but this time I felt something different, something exciting. When we arrived, I immediately felt the atmosphere of creative freedom that seemed to fill the very walls of the place. The old building with its high ceilings, housing the exhibition, was filled with voices, laughter, and discussions. I noticed that Oliver was in his element, effortlessly mingling with visitors, sharing the stories behind his photographs. As I began to look at his works, I realized how different they were from anything I had seen before. Each photograph seemed soaked in emotion and passion. Oliver had managed to capture moments full of life and dynamism, with a sense of energy and freedom I had long forgotten. I was fascinated by his ability to capture fleeting moments, making them live on paper. We walked among the photographs, and I couldn't shake the feeling that each image was speaking directly to me, as if calling me into a dialogue. Oliver noticed my interest and invited me to continue our discussion about art and passion after the exhibition. We strolled through the old streets of Barcelona, where every corner seemed to hold a story. I listened to his tales of finding inspiration in the people and places he met along the way, and realized I hadn't felt such ease in conversation for a long time. We talked about dreams, about what inspires us to create, and for the first time in a long while, I felt the thrill of encountering something new. That evening, when David was working late, Oliver and I decided to continue our conversation in my studio. Surrounded by my paintings and sketches, I felt in my element, and our discussions grew more personal. We shared stories about our lives, about what drives us in our creative endeavors. The more we talked, the stronger I felt the growing attraction between us. I noticed the way he looked at me, and there was something in his gaze that I could not ignore. A fire began to ignite in my heart, one I had not felt in a long time. I knew it was dangerous, that I was playing with fire, but I couldn't stop. That evening was a true revelation for me. I realized that, drawn by the energy and freedom emanating from Oliver, I was beginning to feel more alive than I had in years. Only a couple of days had passed since our evening in the studio when Oliver suggested we spend a day in the mountains. He wanted to take photographs for a new series and said I would be the perfect companion for this little adventure. I hesitated for just a moment, but then agreed. Inside me, a strange mix of excitement and fear was brewing. The proposal was risky, but that very risk drew me in. I felt a strong urge to step beyond the familiar and explore new, uncharted territory. We left early in the morning when the fog still lay low on the road. Oliver was driving, and I couldn't help but notice how effortlessly and confidently he navigated the narrow, winding paths climbing up the mountains. As we ascended higher, we talked about everything that came to mind, our dreams, fears, and experiences. I felt like I could talk to him about anything that was meaningful and important to me. He listened intently to every word and responded with the same openness. When we finally reached the summit, we were surrounded by a silent, starry sky. We got out of the car and climbed a small hill to admire the view. The cold wind whipped against our faces, but I felt warm next to him. We stood side by side, and suddenly our hands touched accidentally. At that moment, I felt something explode inside me. That innocent contact caused a thrill I couldn't explain. Noticing the fire in my eyes, Oliver smiled and suggested a photo shoot in an old abandoned house on the hill we had seen along the way. His suggestion sounded like a challenge. He convinced me that it would be a unique artistic experiment, an opportunity to explore light and shadow, human nature, even the very essence of passion. I felt my heart beat faster. There was something in his voice, in his gaze, that made me agree. We headed towards the abandoned house, and I felt my excitement grow. I knew I was stepping onto dangerous ground, but I couldn't stop. I wanted to see where all this would lead. I stood in front of the old abandoned house, feeling a mix of anxiety and excitement growing inside me. Oliver was already setting up his camera, choosing the right angles, and making notes in his notebook. I couldn't quite pinpoint what was making me so nervous at that moment. The idea of the photo shoot or Oliver's presence itself, his gaze, his energy. "Trust me," he said, smiling. His voice was soft, yet firm. He suggested that I take off my clothes to achieve a particular effect in the photos. I felt a flush of heat on my cheeks, and my pulse quickened. It was a bold step, but something inside me, something long suppressed, yearned for this challenge. I hesitated, but eventually nodded in agreement. Oliver began to play with light and shadows, using the natural light filtering through the broken windows. His movements were confident and precise. I watched him closely, trying to read his intentions. Every word he spoke, every movement, conveyed the passion and boldness I had long since ceased to feel. As I shed my clothes, I felt the cold air on my skin and an unexpected sense of freedom. Oliver chose daring angles that emphasized my curves and femininity, making me feel different, more alive. His camera clicked with the same intensity as my heartbeat. Each shot felt profound and intimate. As the photo shoot continued, I felt our physical presence become almost unbearably palpable. Oliver stood so close that I could feel the warmth of his breath. At one point, He accidentally brushed my hand. The contact was brief, almost fleeting, but it sent a surge of emotions through me that I could not ignore. Our eyes met. There was something in that look that was more than just interest, something deep and forbidden. I felt everything inside me begin to boil. We both realized we could no longer hold back our feelings. I took a step forward, and our lips met in a kiss. Hot, hungry, filled with a passion I hadn't felt in a long time. At that moment, time seemed to stand still. We were lost in that moment, in that first touch. But suddenly, my phone rang. I pulled away sharply as if waking from a dream. David's name flashed on the screen. My heart tightened with surprise and fear. I hesitantly picked up the call. "Liz, hi." David's voice was calm, but I sensed tension in his words. "How are things going? Are you coming back soon?" I exchanged a glance with Oliver, who nodded slightly, signaling that everything was fine. "Yes, David," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're just finishing up and we'll be back soon." David sighed with relief. "Great. Just wanted to make sure everything was okay." I hung up, feeling my heart pounding in my chest. The call reminded me of where I was and what I was doing. It reminded me of the reality I would have to return to. But as I looked at Oliver, I realized that returning to my old life would be much harder than I had imagined. After that incident in the abandoned house, I couldn't get Oliver out of my mind. All my thoughts were focused on him, and every minute of waiting for our next meeting was filled with tension and anticipation. We began meeting on the roof of the old building that Oliver used as his studio. This roof, with its view of the sunset, became our secret refuge, a place where we could be alone and forget about everything. Each time I climbed the creaky stairs to that roof, my heart would race with excitement. Oliver was always there, waiting for me with a smile that made me forget everything else in the world. With each meeting, we grew closer, and the tension between us increased like a taut string. One evening, as the sun was almost hidden behind the horizon, we sat side by side, watching the sky turn bright orange and purple. I could feel my heart beating faster with every word he spoke, with every glance he gave me. Oliver turned to me and quietly said, "Liz, I feel something more for you than just affection." His words pierced me to the core. I looked into his eyes and saw the same passion I felt inside. We kissed again, and this time our kiss was even more desperate, more urgent than before. I felt his arms holding me tighter, his touches becoming bolder. My breath quickened, and I could no longer resist what had been building between us for so long. We let our desires take over right there on the roof, under the fading light of the sunset. I realized we were crossing yet another forbidden line, but I couldn't stop. Every touch, every kiss ignited a fire in me that I couldn't extinguish. I knew our relationship was becoming more dangerous, that we were playing with fire, but I was trapped by my own desire. With each passing day, my attraction to him grew stronger, and I couldn't fight this urge. When it was all over, we lay on the roof, still caught in the moment. I looked at his face, illuminated by the last rays of the sun, and realized my life would never be the same again. I knew it was wrong, that I should stop, but I couldn't. I was completely consumed by him. In the past few days, I had increasingly noticed the tension growing between David and me. He was becoming more silent, his gaze lingering on me more often, as if trying to solve a riddle. I sensed that he was noticing something, but I tried to behave as usual. However, it was difficult to hide my inner turmoil. My thoughts kept returning to Oliver, to our secret meetings, to how we had crossed a line we shouldn't have. I tried to spend more time out of the house, busying myself with trivial tasks to avoid being near David. but he noticed. My pensiveness, my avoidance of his gaze, none of it escaped his attention. One evening, when I returned home after another meeting with Oliver, I found David sitting in the living room, lost in his thoughts. "Liz, we need to talk," he said, his voice quiet but controlled. I felt a chill run down my spine. "About what?" I replied, trying to keep my calm. "I've noticed that you've been different," he continued. "You spend more time away from home, avoiding me. Is something going on?" I pretended not to understand what he meant. "Just a lot of things to do," I tried to explain. "Work, painting. Sometimes I just need to be alone." He nodded, but his gaze never left me. I sensed that it wasn't easy for him to accept this explanation. A few days passed, and one day I saw him looking intently at Oliver's camera. My heart stopped. I remembered those daring shots Oliver had taken that evening in the abandoned house. David didn't say anything, but there was something strange in his eyes. I tried to act like nothing was wrong, but a few hours later, he approached me, holding the camera in his hands. "What is this?" His voice was as cold as ice. I looked at the screen and saw the photos from that very photoshoot when I had taken off all my clothes. The shots were bold, almost provocative, and it was clear that there was some strange intimacy between Oliver and me. It's just a photo shoot," I breathed, feeling my hands begin to tremble. "Oliver wanted to create something unique." "Just a photo shoot?" David repeated, his eyes narrowing with distrust. "Do you think it's normal for a nephew to photograph you like this?" I tried to explain, but my voice sounded uncertain. "There was nothing between us, David, I swear." He clearly didn't believe me, but he decided not to push the subject further. His face was stern, filled with disappointment and hurt. I realized that he was beginning to suspect something I couldn't explain. That night, while I slept, David, as I would later find out, quietly rummaged through my bags and placed trackers in them. He decided to follow me, trying to figure out what was really going on. Oliver began to notice that I had become much more cautious during our meetings. My anxiety grew, and I often looked around as if afraid that someone might notice us. Oliver didn't ask questions, but I felt he understood something had changed. "Let's get away for the weekend," he suggested one day when we met on the roof of his studio. "There's a big art exhibition in Valencia right now. It might help us distract ourselves and relax." His suggestion was tempting. Valencia, a new city, new faces, and perhaps a chance to escape David's watchful eyes for at least a few days. "All right," I nodded, not wanting to think about it too long, but we have to keep it a secret from David. We decided to leave on Friday evening to spend the whole weekend there. I told David that I planned to go with a friend to a painting workshop, and he seemed to accept it without much suspicion. But in reality, he knew more than I could have imagined. Thanks to the trackers hidden in my bag, David was monitoring our every move. As soon as Oliver and I got in the car and left the city, he set off right behind us. The trip to Valencia turned out to be exactly what we needed. When we arrived, I felt the excitement and anxiety that had plagued me in recent days start to fade. We immersed ourselves in the atmosphere of the art exhibition, enjoying the paintings and installations. But in truth, our minds were far from art. Later, we rented a yacht to spend the day at sea. It was a decision that allowed us to completely disconnect from reality. The waves gently rocked the yacht, the sun warmed our faces, and I felt my soul filling with a lightness and happiness I hadn't felt in a long time. We were alone, and finally, we could talk about the future, about what lay ahead for us. Oliver said he wanted to be with me, that he could no longer pretend. I looked at him, feeling my heart fill with mixed emotions, joy and fear at the same time. I can't hide it anymore either, I admitted, realizing there was no going back. On the yacht, far from prying eyes, our feelings flared up with new intensity. We forgot about everything except each other. The night became ours, full of passion and desire. I realized that every moment with him was a step over the line, but I couldn't stop anymore. But David saw everything. He was watching us, keeping a safe distance so we wouldn't notice his presence. In public, we behaved cautiously, trying not to reveal our true feelings, but David was perceptive enough to know something was going on between us. He observed but did not interfere. It seemed he was waiting for the right moment to figure it all out, to understand how far our relationship had gone. But I knew nothing of this and continued to allow myself to believe in the illusion of temporary freedom. After our return from Valencia, I felt as if I were standing on the edge of a cliff. On one hand, the passion for Oliver still boiled within me, making my heart race every time we met. On the other hand, I couldn't ignore that David was becoming increasingly suspicious. His looks were cold and heavy, his words clipped and filled with hidden meaning. Oliver and I continued our secret meetings, trying to be as cautious as possible. We returned to the roof of the old building where we could hide from everyone, away from prying eyes. But I felt as if someone was still watching us. It was more than a feeling. It was fear. Realizing he couldn't get the truth from me, David decided to hire a private detective. His suspicions were growing, and he wanted proof that something was going on between me and Oliver. The detective followed us every step of the way, and one day, during one of our meetings on the roof, he took several photos. These photos were exactly what David needed. They captured our kisses, our embraces, enough to prove this was more than just friendship. When David received these photos, he didn't wait long. He came home, threw the pictures in front of me, and started shouting. "You think I didn't notice anything? You think I'm blind?" His voice was filled with fury. I looked at the photos and realized all my attempts to keep the secret were in vain. "David, it's not what you think." I tried to explain, but he cut me off. "Shut up!" His shout echoed throughout the room. "I trusted you. I loved you. And you? You destroyed everything we built together." I felt the words getting stuck in my throat. David continued speaking, and each word was like a knife to the heart. "I will make your life a living hell, Liz. I will take everything you have. You will regret ever doing this to me. I will make you suffer to the very end, and then I will leave your life and divorce you." I understood that his threat was real. I saw in his eyes the pain mixed with anger, and I knew he was ready to do anything to get revenge. My head was spinning. I felt cornered, trapped. Everything I once thought was stable and safe had suddenly turned into chaos and fear. A wave of despair rose inside me. I began to realize that the consequences of my actions with Oliver would be irreversible. I didn't know what to do next, how to live with this knowledge, and how to get out of this situation. I realized I had made a terrible mistake, and now I would have to pay a high price for it. After the furious confrontation with David, I felt destroyed, as if the ground had completely disappeared from under my feet. I sat in my room, unable to believe that all of this was actually happening. My hands trembled as I typed a message to Oliver. "David knows everything," I wrote, my fingers slipping over the phone screen. "He's threatening me, says he'll turn my life into a nightmare." My heart was pounding wildly as I sent the message. There was no response from Oliver for a while, and that time seemed endless. Finally, after a few minutes, a short message came. "Wait, I'm coming." I knew I had only one chance to get out of this. When David left for work, I began to quickly pack my things. Inside, There was an emptiness, and in my heart, fear. I understood that everything had collapsed, and I needed to leave this house as soon as possible. I was throwing my things into a bag, hardly thinking about what I was taking. The main thing was to get out of here, to disappear. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Oliver. He entered the room with a worried expression on his face. "Liz, what's going on?" he asked, coming closer. I looked at him, unable to hold back the tears. "David knows about us," I said, my voice trembling. "He's threatening me. I don't know what to do." Oliver paused for a moment, his face hardening. "Liz," he began cautiously, "I don't know what to say. I never planned for things to go this far." I froze, feeling a wave of despair rising in my chest. "What do you mean?" I asked, already knowing I wouldn't like the answer. He sighed, avoiding my gaze. "I didn't think about a serious relationship," he confessed. "This was all just a moment of passion, something temporary." "I didn't know you were so deeply involved." Those words hit me like a bolt of lightning. I stared at him, feeling the world around me crumble. "What do you mean, something temporary?" My voice grew louder, filled with pain and disappointment. "I thought there was something between us, that this wasn't just a game." Oliver took a step back, his eyes expressing helplessness. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Liz," he replied, "but I can't offer you what you want." I felt the tears running down my cheeks. "I lost everything for you," I whispered. "Everything." He stood silently, not knowing what to say, and I felt myself being consumed by despair. I thought that Oliver and I had real feelings, that he was my escape from this world of routine and boredom. But now I saw that I was wrong. I was alone, betrayed not only by my husband, but by my own heart. I turned, feeling the emptiness and pain overwhelm me. I needed to leave, to hide from all of this. I didn't know what to do next, but I knew one thing. I had lost everything, and now I would have to pick up the pieces of my life all over again. He paced back and forth, clearly nervous, before finally stopping and saying, all right, listen. I have an idea, but I'm not even sure it'll work. We could try starting over, somewhere else." His words caught me off guard, and I frowned. "What do you mean?" I asked, searching his face for what he might be planning. "We could go to Lisbon," he suggested, with a hint of doubt in his voice. "It's a beautiful city, and no one knows us there. We could start fresh, forget about the past, and try to build something new." I felt a mix of emotions, from hope to fear. "Do you think it will help?" I asked quietly, still not sure if this was the right decision. Oliver shrugged. "I don't know, Liz, but we have to do something. We can't stay here. It's destroying both of us." I wanted to believe this plan could work. Maybe in another place, away from everything that reminded us of our mistakes, we would have a chance. "Okay," I agreed, feeling like this might be our only way out. We packed up our things, leaving behind the city that had become strange and heavy for us. I hoped Lisbon would bring us a new beginning, that our relationship could get a second chance in this bright, vibrant city. At first, everything seemed fresh and exciting. We found a small apartment in the center of Lisbon, and I tried to think of it as the start of a new, better life. I was inspired by the views of the old streets and the warm sea, feeling a slight thrill. But soon enough, it became clear that things were not so simple. Oliver began to withdraw more and more, his mood becoming darker. I noticed he was spending more time alone, sitting at his computer for hours or going for long walks, not answering my questions about what was bothering him. Our conversations grew shorter, and the pauses between them grew longer. It felt like he was building a wall between us, distancing himself from me. I could feel him drifting further away, and I didn't know what to do about it. I began to wonder if I had made the right choice in leaving everything for Oliver. Perhaps our escape had been a mistake, and we just didn't want to see the obvious. Lisbon, which initially seemed like salvation, had become a place where I felt more lost and alone with each passing day. A few weeks had passed, and I increasingly felt an invisible wall between Oliver and me growing taller and more solid. He was there, but it seemed like something was slipping away, like sand through my fingers. Our conversations became more superficial, and a heavy silence hung between us. One evening, as we sat in our small apartment in Lisbon, Oliver finally broke the silence. His face was serious and tired. He sighed and, as if gathering his courage, said, "Liz, I need to tell you something." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What is it?" I asked, holding my breath. He looked me in the eyes and slowly, with regret, said, "I think we need to break up." I froze, unable to believe my ears. "What do you mean?" My voice trembled, and I couldn't hide my pain. "I never planned anything serious, Liz," he continued, lowering his gaze. "Our relationship was a moment of passion. It was something temporary, and I never thought it would go this far." These words cut through me like a knife. Everything I thought was real turned out to be an illusion. "But you said you wanted to be with me. We left together to start over." I tried to find an excuse, hoping he would change his mind. Oliver just shook his head. "I thought I could, but I can't. I'm sorry, Liz, but I can't go on." My heart seemed to stop. I had lost everything for him, destroyed my life, and now he was telling me it was just a temporary passion. I felt tears streaming down my cheeks. "I meant nothing to you, did I?" I whispered. He tried to say something, but I wasn't listening. I stood up and went to the other room, closing the door behind me. My mind flashed to thoughts of David. Even in Lisbon, I couldn't escape his presence. His threats continued. He tried to find me, called, left messages, promising to make my life a living hell if I didn't come back. Fortunately, I had managed to find the trackers he had hidden in my bags and threw them away. Now he could no longer track my location, but that didn't make his threats any less terrifying. I knew he was still looking for me, and his anger was only growing. Left alone in this foreign city, I felt completely lost and shattered. My passions and romantic expectations had led to total collapse. I realized I had destroyed everything in my life for what turned out to be just an illusion. Now I was alone, without a home, without support, without a future. But at some point, I realized that I still had one choice. I could let despair consume me completely, or I could find the strength to start over. I knew the path would not be easy, but I decided to try. I had to find a way to rebuild myself, to find my place in this world, even if it meant starting from scratch. It was my only chance to survive and find myself again. After everything that happened, I had no choice but to return to my hometown. It was not an easy decision, but I knew I needed to start over where it all began. I couldn't stay in Lisbon. There was too much pain and disappointment tied to that place. I felt lost, but I knew this was my chance to find myself. I found a new job at a small gallery. Art had always been my passion, and this job allowed me to feel that I was doing something meaningful again. I started diving into new hobbies, surfing and cooking. The sea gave me a sense of freedom, and cooking brought calm and comfort. I found solace in the simple things I had once overlooked. I began to learn to forgive myself for my mistakes. I understood that I couldn't change the past or undo what had been done, but I could shape my future. Ultimately, I realized that happiness is something one must seek within, not hope to find in another person. I learned to appreciate my solitude and began to see it as an opportunity to grow and develop. But one issue remained unresolved: David. I knew that sooner or later I would have to meet him. His threats and anger continued to hang over me like a dark cloud. I knew I had to be careful, so I suggested meeting in a crowded place to ensure my safety. I was nervous as I waited for him at the cafe on the central square. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel the blood pulsing in my temples. Finally, I saw him approaching me. He looked tired and bitter, but to my surprise, his expression was calmer than I had expected. "Liz," he said, sitting down across from me. His voice was steady, but I could still sense the hidden bitterness in his words. "Why did you want to meet?" "We need to talk, David," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. "About our divorce, about what happens next." He nodded, pausing for a moment. "I've thought a lot about all this," he said. "I really loved you. You hurt me deeply, but I don't want to keep fighting." I felt my heart tighten at his words. "David, I'm sorry that it happened this way," I began. "I know I hurt you, and I can't change that. But I want to move on, and I want you to be able to move on too." He looked at me, and I saw a shadow of pain in his eyes. "I've already filed for divorce," he said. "And I'm leaving you half of our house. It was your home too, and I don't want to take that away from you." I was surprised. I hadn't expected such generosity from him after everything that had happened between us. "Thank you, David," I whispered, not knowing what else to say. We signed the papers right there in the cafe. I felt strange, liberated, but also as if a part of me was gone forever. I knew it was the end, but I also understood it was the beginning of something new. I walked out of the cafe, realizing I was now free to start my life anew, on my own terms. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like it might not be such a bad thing. A few months had passed since I returned to my hometown. Slowly, I began to notice that my life was getting back on track. I found joy in simple things: long walks along the waterfront, the warm light of the morning sun, conversations with new acquaintances. My new job at the gallery brought me satisfaction, and my surfing and cooking hobbies filled my life with new colors and meaning. I was starting to regain confidence, feeling that I could handle whatever life had in store for me. I learned to love myself, forgive myself for my mistakes, and see them as opportunities for growth. For the first time in a long time, I felt I was moving forward. But one day, giving in to a wave of despair and nostalgia for the past, I decided to try to restore my relationship with David. Perhaps it was a moment of weakness, a desire to return to what was familiar and safe. I realized I still missed the times when we had plans for the future, when we were happy. I sent him a message asking for a meeting. David agreed, and we met at the same cafe where we had signed the divorce papers. He looked calm. His face was free from the anger and resentment it once bore. When I saw him, something familiar twisted in my chest, and I tried to gather my thoughts. "David, I want to talk to you," I began, feeling the words catch in my throat. "I realize my mistakes, and I know I was wrong. I want to start over. With you." He listened to me attentively, not interrupting. When I finished, he sighed and looked me straight in the eyes. "Liz, I understand that things are hard for you right now," he said softly. "And I truly wish you well. But I've found my own peace. I can't go back. I've decided to move on and leave the past behind." Those words were painful, but I knew he was right. I realized that my attempt to restore my relationship with David was driven not by a desire for love, but by a fear of being alone. I also recalled my attempt to build a life with Oliver in Lisbon, despite his uncertainty and childishness, and that, too, had been out of fear, not love. I smiled, realizing this clearly for the first time. "Thank you, David," I said, feeling an unexpected relief. "Thank you for your honesty. I understand." We said goodbye, and I felt a huge weight lift from my shoulders. I realized that my future was not tied to my past, that I didn't need to try to rebuild what had been broken. My path was forward, not looking back. I decided to open a new chapter in my life, finding joy in independence and gaining confidence in myself. I understood that happiness is something internal, that it cannot be found in other people. I was ready for new adventures, for a new stage in my life. And with a smile on my face, I looked to the future, ready to embrace whatever it would bring.